Welcome to the Bio and Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Satwik Nath, and today we're diving into the world of biomedical engineering. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest, Dr. Megan Madonna. She holds the position of Assistant Research Professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the Duke University's Pratt School of Engineering. She has a tremendous amount of contribution to the field of BME, which includes research, publications, and teaching. Today, she is here to speak about her work and to inspire others to take interest in BME. Without further delay, let's dive right in. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. This is gonna be really fun. So I'm Megan. I originally am from Texas. I grew up in Dallas. And then I kind of found engineering in high school. I went to Vanderbilt for undergrad, also in biomedical engineering. And then I moved to Durham to get to do my PhD. So I did my PhD in biomedical engineering as well. And then I stayed around and did some research as a staff member here at Duke. And then now I'm part of the faculty in biomedical engineering. Still live in the area and with my husband and my 1-year-old son.
So what would you say made biomedical engineering interesting for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I didn't really know what BME was or biomedical engineering was at the start of high school. I knew I really liked healthcare, and in my brain and kind of what was shown to me as a middle school and high schooler, that meant medical school. There wasn't really a lot of other options around, surrounding healthcare or research or anything kind of like that. The research in my brain was more like the biology side. So if you wanted to do healthcare, you were going to be a doctor. If you wanted to do basic science, you were going to do research. Which is not the case, and I can talk about that in a second. But that's kind of how it was presented to me. So I kind of went through high school taking a lot of science classes, thinking that I was going to be pre-med and undergrad. When I got towards my senior year, and one of my teachers and mentors introduced an engineering camp to me over the summer, and highly recommended that I apply. And it was through NASA, so part of that program is requiring that you pick an engineering field and write about it and think about why it's interesting. And I had never really been like exposed to what engineering was besides, kind of building a bridge, something like that. That's more like very like routine stereotype engineering. So I kind of happenstance found biomedical engineering through this program. And it was kind of the best of both worlds. Like I really liked math, really liked physics. Um, but this was kind of applying that to that healthcare side that I was really interested in originally, specifically cancer. So I kind of found biomedical engineering because of a homework assignment that kind of was very fortuitous. And then I was learning more about it and applied to a bunch of different places for undergrad that had biomedical engineering as an option. And decided on Vanderbilt, and kind of didn't look back. So I got to Vandy and still wasn't entirely sure if I wanted to do biomedical engineering and then go to medical school. Still didn't really have a lot of research experience. But part of the things that they tell you to do if you want to go to medical school is to do research. So I found a biomedical engineering lab at Vandy under Dr. Melissa Scala, who who was doing cancer research in BME. And I thought this was like the perfect merriment, and found out that I really liked research. I liked being in the lab, asking questions, solving problems. This lab developed optical technologies to look at cancer. And that's kind of how I found my passion for optics as well. So really, I just kind of stumbled into it, realized I liked it, and then didn't really look back. So when it became time to kind of next steps after undergrad, I kind of looked around, applied to medical school, applied to graduate school, applied to both because there are MD, PhD programs, and got into a handful of all three of them. And my last stop on my interview tour for grad school was Duke, in the Center for Global Women's Health Technologies, which is where I work now, and kind of fell in love with the research. Was inspired by Nimi, who is kind of the director of our center, and what she wanted to do in women's health and engineering, and thought this was like the best place to work in the world. So didn't look back and decided to just do my PhD. And yeah, and that's how I got here.
Yeah. So earlier you were talking about how it was either research or going into the medical field, but then you said that that's not true. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think in my head, at least in high school, I wasn't really aware of what biomedical engineering was. So I realized that there was this whole field surrounding medicine and applying technologies to solve problems, and that was biomedical engineering. So BME is super broad. So I live in a little small area called optics and imaging. So we create or use microscopes or other imaging devices. People in my area use ultrasound or MRI or PET, a lot of the things that you see in a typical hospital setting. To interrogate things about the body. So we look at cancer, we look at breast cancer and cervical cancer. But then there's other areas that are working on, joint replacement or protein therapy or growing muscles in a dish or doing neural stimulation for deep brain stimulations for various diseases. And it was the merriment of kind of the pathology or the disease states. With the technology or kind of the new research side of it that I really didn't realize was happening until I found it. And then I knew that's what I wanted to work on. And did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So speaking of your work, what have you been working on recently? Like what are some of the research you've done?
Yeah, so our lab focuses on breast cancer and cervical cancer, and we kind of go about it in kind of two different ways. So I'll start with cervical cancer. So cervical cancer in the U.S. is a very straightforward cancer to catch early and treat because of the built-in healthcare infrastructure that we have in the US. It requires a lot of patient compliance and returning to multiple visits. But that structure works for the most part in most areas of this country. Um, so there's what's called screening, where patients go in, have their cervix swabbed, and have a pap smear and go HPV testing. And if those are irregular or positive, they can get referred out to a secondary site for colposcopy, where a physician or a healthcare worker will use a large kind of microscope type thing called a colposcopy system that will visualize the cervix through the speculum. And then if there's an area of suspicion, they can be referred out for a biopsy. And if that comes back positive, then they go into what's called LEAP therapy, which is a cauterization cone to take out the area of concern. And that works really well in the US. The rate of cervical cancer has dramatically decreased since the kind of creation of this care paradigm. But that doesn't work everywhere in the world for a lot of reasons. It takes some patients several hours or multiple bus rides to get to a clinic that offers one of these touch points. And that requires them to go take off work, find childcare sometimes, and it's really hard to do multiple times. So there's a big push from the WHO to consolidate that for a see and treat paradigm where you decrease the number of visits that a patient undergoes to be able to maybe visualize and treat in the same visit. So that way you don't have any loss to follow up. So on our cervical cancer project, we work on creating and scaling and testing optical devices or microscopes to visualize the cervix using low-cost technologies. Um, and then kind of pairing that with locally available therapies. So our lab has created a device called the pocket colposcope that can visualize the cervix with a comparable ability to the expensive colposcopes that are these large, bulky, on-wheel machines. It's really handheld. It's about this long, and it has much more simple optics behind what is typically a microscope because the working distance is much shorter. So instead of trying to visualize the cervix from a larger working distance, the our pocket colposcope can be inserted through the speculum and then get pretty close to the cervix itself, so that you can visualize the cervix really easily. So the goal is that can we use our device to see and visualize kind of what's going on, pinpoint any potential areas of concern, and then kind of note and have that be paired with um, what's called a thermocoagulator, which is an easy, it's a little bit like a rod with a handle that can cauterize the area really easily to kind of remove the precancer. So a big push of our research on that side is working within existing healthcare structures in different places globally and figuring out how we can integrate a low-cost imaging device into their existing care paradigm to kind of improve reliability, improve sensitivity, and improve overall workflow. That's what the cervical cancer project is. And then our other side of our lab works on breast cancer. So for breast cancer, we're looking at different ways to kind of interrogate the tissue and then treat it using low-cost options. So we create systems that can look at the tumor's metabolism, so how the tumor uses energy sources, and how that can inform us on risk. So we look at a few different endpoints. We look at how much sugar a tumor is taking up. We look at how much fat the tumor is taking up, and then we look at how hard the mitochondria is working. So if we use all those together, it can tell us, is a tumor going through glycolysis to create lactate? Is it going through glucose-fueled mitochondrial respiration? Is it using alternative sources like that? And that can also tell us or inform us more about how aggressive a tumor is, because we do know from other people's research that depending on what fuel source a tumor is looking at, it may be more aggressive, maybe less aggressive, and that changes over time. So we also look to see how this changes between a tumor that's actively growing or after a tumor maybe is treated and kind of hunkers down in a dormant state, and how that changes before recurrence, which is a unfortunately a very common cause for kind of like end stage disease for breast cancer. So we look at that. So that's kind of on the diagnostic or front side of the treatment or of the care cascade. And then the other side of our lab works on low-cost ablation technologies to treat those tumors. So can we use really, really cheap ingredients like ethanol or food additives or the WHO essential medicines list to provide some low-dose chemos to kind of create a low-cost kind of injectate to treat disease as well, to decrease the cost of treating these cancers as well. So that's kind of what we do in our lab.
Okay, so while you were talking about that, I noticed that you said a lot about keeping everything low cost on like
Mhm.
both sides.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that like the main goal here is to create technologies that the average person can get their hands on.
Yeah. I think the cost of healthcare is always rising. The US is no exception to that. With our goal being, can we increase access to high quality healthcare by bringing the cost down? Absolutely.
That's really interesting, and that's a really important thing that you're working on.
Thanks.
Is there any other research that you've done which you would also say is important?
So I also looked to see what keeps people in engineering. So part of my brain is working on kind of cancer and imaging and things like that. And the other part of my brain and my research looks at how people are engineers, why people are engineers, and how can we keep people in engineering. So I do some education research to try to figure out ways why people are engineers and what makes them excited about engineering, and how can we instill that type of experience in people that maybe haven't seen engineering before. So that's in middle school and high schoolers. Can we empower them to solve problems that are important to them? Um, we have a really big push about solving problems in your local community. So if other people's research has told us that um, if someone is passionate about a project or it affects them personally, they are much more likely to kind of progress through problem solving. They'll show more resilience. So can we kind of simulate that environment where students find projects they're super passionate about? And can we channel that using engineering skills to solve a problem? So we have a middle school and high school program called Ignite. Um, that challenges students in our local area to look into the community and figure out problems that are important to them. And then that we use human-centered design and the engineering design process to walk our students kind of throughout the process from concept to innovation. So that's the other side of mine is figuring out why people are engineers and how we can make more engineers.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting because we do need more engineers as time goes on. It's a
Yeah.
really important field.
Yeah, and as we I mean problems keep on getting more and more complex. That's kind of the nature of the problem solving. And the more diverse we have of a population that are working on the problems, the more creative and more diverse solutions we can get. So it's definitely about increasing the pipeline broadly and how can we get students that maybe wouldn't otherwise see themselves as engineers to consider engineering or at least think about engineering or think like an engineer to solve problems.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say are some other works of BME going on at Duke?
Yeah, so it's really, really broad. So BME at Duke has a bunch of different areas. We have a neural engineering area. Um, we have stem cell work. We have biomechanics work. We have people working on microbial resistance and kind of modeling that. We have labs working in algorithm and deep learning to help with either diagnostics or modeling to figure out how the body uses as like biological twins. We have people working on kind of big data. So there's a lab here called the Big Ideas Lab that uses information that's traditionally kind of stored on people's smartwatches to help inform on, um, different disease states, and can we use data that's already publicly available or readily collected to improve diagnostics or kind of let people know what's going on. Um, in the tissue engineering space, we have labs growing specific types of tissues. There's a lab that works on creating muscle fibers to kind of use as a test bed to solve problems. Um, we have a group that is working on drug delivery. So how can we best deliver a ideal drug to a situation for it to be super targeted to that spot? Um, we have people that are looking at gut health and how that can be affected and how engineering can inform on modeling or better getting to know what the gut brain connection is. Um, we have a lot of different things, and all of that involves physics, math, and chemistry. It just kind of depends on what area is kind of more prevalent, but it all kind of relies on STEM, and that makes it really broad. BME is really broad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks really broad from what you were talking about. Like, if you go into BME, there's so much that's available to work on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hesitate to say this as broadly, but if there's a healthcare problem that exists, there is likely a biomedical engineering person working on it, which is really cool. And Duke is not exhaustive of what we work on. There's definitely projects that Duke doesn't super specialize in, but we do. There is a lot of stuff to cover, which is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything like specific that someone else is working on which you find really interesting?
That's a really good question. It's all super interesting. There's a lab here at Duke that is working on new imaging devices to better model the placenta and seeing how blood flows through that. I'm really passionate about women's health, and it's traditionally been an understudied area about things we don't really know about and how pregnancy affects people. So the fact that something that's pretty closely related to my work in imaging is working on that project, I think is super cool. Um, it it's just fascinating how little we know and how much left there is to figure out about something that's been happening, since the dawn of time. But yeah, I would say that's the coolest thing in my head right now.
Mm-hmm. So, as you're working in women's health, would you say that you just said that they're underrepresented? So, would you say that that problem has been much better now? Like, there's more people working on it and more people interested in women's health now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's still definitely understudied, and I do think we are getting better at it. I think I think women's health is also sometimes limited to like maternal fetal health or kind of gyne health, so sexual and reproductive health. When in reality, there are differences of how different people are affected by different diseases. So I think that the broadening of it, of how can hormones affect, different disease states, how does different disease states present themselves? All of that is like kind of part of the knowledge gap that we have between, research for a very long time was only conducted in male animals. So there's a lot of the ways that we describe diseases is kind of based on that. So how can we continue to push the needle to learn more about yes, the importance of like pregnancy and um, postpartum and fetal development in breast cancer and cervical cancer, but how can we also have a whole body looking at it in kind of including the diversity that is the human condition, and how that affects how we understand medicine, I think is a really cool thing to look at and kind of
Mhm.
what hopefully we'll kind of move into.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. And another question I had for you is so as we go on in the future, machine learning is becoming a really big thing. So
Yeah.
how would you say machine learning is playing its part at Duke and in BME?
Yeah. So in our lab, we have grad students or PhD students that are working on developing algorithms to aid in diagnostics, and aid in image capture. So for our lab specifically, we have students working on problems, for example, where say a healthcare provider collects an image of a cervix. That image can be uploaded into our cloud, into our algorithm, to hopefully give some sort of answer of risk. So do we think that the cervix looks suspicious? Is there an area of precancer we should look out for? Can we use algorithms to kind of pinpoint what our algorithm thinks is the best place to biopsy? Right now, we're looking at ways to look at that and compare it to what trained healthcare providers do to kind of validate what we're looking at. We have other people in our lab looking at ways to augment data or kind of inform on if image captures are good enough. So, is there an image that is taken and maybe it's too blurry, or maybe it's out of focus, or the cervix isn't in the field of view, which would kind of dramatically decrease the ability for something to be diagnosed. So it's kind of like a forward problem and a backward problem of like how can we use the power of AI to make our technologies better. A lot of people are looking at it for different ways to help with imaging. So can we use some machine learning based diagnostics from medical images, is a big area. We have a lab here looking at digital twins and seeing how that can map onto different disease states. Um, it's definitely it's definitely an area on its own within biomedical engineering, but it's almost being now more of a ubiquitous that like every lab or every area of research is integrating some part of machine learning, whether that is higher powered analysis or improving your ability to know more information about your data. But it's almost becoming just like a tool within all of biomedical engineering, as well as its own kind of area of like image diagnostics, things like that. But it's slowly, quickly becoming just kind of a commonplace within almost every lab here, which is cool to kind of see it happen in real time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's becoming like really commonplace everywhere now. So,
That's right.
yeah, to see that people are using it in the lab to learn more about their data is really interesting. So, when was the first time that you saw BME and or you saw machine learning in BME?
That's a I so I started grad school about 9 years ago, and it was just starting in like, there weren't many classes in BME that were offered for grad students. There was definitely some computer science and some in computer engineering and ECE, electrical engineering, but not as many in BME. But since I've graduated, the number of courses that we offer to both our undergrads and our grad students include that. It's just kind of like a mainstay option for students to take. And to me, that kind of tells me that it's here. Not that, I mean, obviously it's here to stay, but it's integrated fully into BME as like a culture of engineering is now that it's like fully integrated into coursework. So I would say kind of in the last 10 years, but exponentially growing year after
Mhm.
year.
Well, yeah, that's what people have been seeing everywhere. Like
Right,
even in schools, it's exponentially growing.
right,
Mhm.
exactly.
Well, it's good to see that you're using BME to make your work a lot easier.
Yeah,
hmm So this is probably the final question I have. What advice would you give to someone interested in a career in BME?
yeah, that's a really, really good question. Um, I think my first piece of advice is that anyone interested in the area should do it. I think there's often a lot of um, like scariness surrounding engineering as people think it's hard or it's not approachable. But I think biomedical engineering is super approachable. It covers material that almost anyone would think is interesting. I would hesitate to find anyone ever that couldn't find an area that BME is working on that someone wouldn't find interesting because it's just so broad. Um, so definitely not to limit yourself on what you think biomedical engineering is. I think that's an area. Two, I think another important part is figuring out that yes, your ability to do math, biology, chemistry, and physics is super important for successful completion of your coursework. But in biomedical engineering as a research field, um, there are other facets that are also equally important. So, are you creative? Research requires a lot of creativity and thinking outside the box. And how can you use creativity to push the needle forward as far as new knowledge? And that's something that I um, don't think I really quite captured as an undergrad until I got to grad school about the importance of kind of those softer skills, quote unquote. Um, that was a big one that I kind of learned on my way through grad school. And I do think grad school made me a more creative thinker. I think another one is the ability to communicate. So, especially as a researcher, if you can't communicate what you are doing or why you think it's important, nobody else will. So, being an advocate for yourself and believing in yourself enough to be able to tell other people what you're working on, is a really important first step. And then, ability to carry that through and tell a wider audience. There's a big push in engineering to help students specifically um, be better communicators to their peers and to people in the field, but also that ability to talk to people about what you're doing that aren't in the field. Because if you're just kind of talking about BME, talking shop with other biomedical engineers, you're kind of in an echo chamber. So everyone will think everything's interesting, but where it really matters is your ability to talk about biomedical engineering and what you're working on and how it affects people to people. Because when it comes down to it, BME is helping people and helping kind of the environment and the world. And the world is not made up of all biomedical engineers. So it's important to be able to speak about what you're doing to non-engineers, to non-physicians. So I would say be creative, and be able to communicate what you are passionate about to a broad audience. So kind of the two pieces of advice that I think are really important beyond the coursework itself.
Okay. Well, before we end, is there anything else that you would like to say?
No, I mean, thank you so much for having me. This has been super fun. Do you have anything else that you think needs to be touched on or?
No, I think you did a pretty good job touching on everything.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I hope that anyone who watches this is interested in biomedical engineering. Our lab is always looking for really passionate high schoolers, undergrads, and grad students. So our door's always open. Our emails are always on. So please reach out with any questions.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up this fascinating episode, I'd like to thank Dr. Madonna again for sharing her incredible knowledge and expertise in biomedical engineering. Her dedication to the field is truly inspiring. We'll continue these captivating conversations at the intersection of science and innovation. Until next time, this is Satwik Nath signing off from the Bio and Beyond podcast. Remember, the exploration of science never ends. There's always more to discover.